7 months into my pregnancy, I accidentally overheard a conversation between my husband and the poor student I had been sponsoring. Steven, if your wife finds out that the baby in her womb is actually our fertilized egg, she might get so angry that she'd kill herself, don't you think? Rosie said and chuckled softly. It'd be better if she did. That way, all her assets would be mine, Steven coldly answered. The only problem is if she decides to divorce me and kick me out. That's why we need to keep the secret. Once our child inherits her assets, we'll deliver her a crushing blow. That night, I pretended I didn't hear a thing. I gave birth to the child and raised him with utmost care. 24 years later, after my son returned from studying abroad, I transferred all my company shares and assets to his name. At a press conference, Rosie, the impoverished student before, holding my husband's arm and clutching a maternity test report, she walked straight up to me and declared, Kian is my biological son. You've been taking him from me all these years. It's time to return him to me now. My son also threw a divorce agreement in my face, his words cold and ruthless. Hurry up and divorce my dad so we can finally reunite as a family of 3. Considering you gave birth to and raised me, I'll give you a monthly allowance of $200. I smirked faintly and replied, all right. 7 months into my pregnancy, I accidentally overheard a conversation between my husband and the poor student I had been sponsoring. Steven, if your wife finds out that the baby in her womb is actually our fertilized egg, she might get so angry that she'd kill herself, don't you think? Rosie said and chuckled softly. It'd be better if she did. That way, all her assets would be mine, Steven coldly answered. The only problem is if she decides to divorce me and kick me out. That's why we need to keep the secret. Once our child inherits her assets, we'll deliver her a crushing blow. That night, I pretended I didn't hear a thing. I gave birth to the child and raised him with utmost care. 24 years later, after my son returned from studying abroad, I transferred all my company shares and assets to his name. At a press conference, Rosie, the impoverished student before, holding my husband's arm and clutching a maternity test report, she walked straight up to me and declared, Kian is my biological son. You've been taking him from me all these years. It's time to return him to me now. My son also threw a divorce agreement in my face, his words cold and ruthless. Hurry up and divorce my dad so we can finally reunite as a family of 3. Considering you gave birth to and raised me, I'll give you a monthly allowance of $200. I smirked faintly and replied, all right. Wife, weren't you supposed to attend a board meeting at the company today? Why are you still working in the study? Steven walked in with a cup of hot milk, placing it gently in front of me, his voice as tender as ever. I closed my laptop and smiled up at him. Kian's teacher mentioned he's been coughing a bit lately. I've arranged for him to see the best pediatric specialist tomorrow. Touched, Steven stroked my hair and said, you always get so concerned whenever Kian has even the slightest discomfort. When he grows up, he'll definitely repay your kindness with filial devotion. I looked at Steven and replied matter-of-factly, of course. I'm Kian's mother. If I don't look after him, who will? Moved by my words, Steven smiled warmly. You're amazing. Marrying you and raising a child with you has been the greatest blessing of my life. I met his gaze, his eyes filled with affection, and I offered him a faint smile without saying a word. Steven and I had been together for 10 years, 3 years of dating and 7 years of marriage. During this decade, he had always cared for me when I was sick or tired, surprised me in unexpected ways, and held me tightly during moments of passion, whispering that he would love me forever. Had I not overheard that conversation that day, I would never have believed that the man who claimed to love me so deeply could betray me like this. Aunt Rosie, you're finally here. Kian's delighted voice suddenly echoed from the living room. I immediately got up and walked out of the study, only to see Rosie stepping through the door. She effortlessly scooped my son into her arms and planted a playful kiss on his cheek. Baby Kian, did you miss me? As she spoke, her gaze fell on me, her smile freezing, her expression momentarily unnatural. Before she could say anything, Steven quickly stepped forward to explain. Wife, there was a parent-child outdoor activity at Kian's kindergarten today. I figured you'd be busy with work, so I didn't bother you. I asked Rosie to help out instead. Rosie put down Kian and immediately chimed in nervously. Yes, Daphne, you've supported me for so many years. I've always been grateful and wanted to repay your kindness. The moment I got Steven's call, I rushed right over. Watching her flustered attempts to cover up her guilt, I couldn't help but recall the day my son was born. Rosie had also accompanied Steven to the hospital under the pretext of visiting the baby, staying by his side as I endured labor. At that time, Rosie was incredibly excited, pacing back and forth in the hallway, wringing her hands nervously. When she saw that I had given birth to a son, she immediately rushed over, grabbing the baby and refusing to let go. Her eyes were brimming with joy, turning red with excitement. The nurse, unable to hold back a chuckle, teased her, "Who are you to the child? You seem even more excited than the mother." Rosie looked embarrassed, but quickly tried to explain when she noticed I was silent. "Daphne, I couldn't help myself. Kian is just too adorable, and I accidentally gave him a kiss. You're not mad, are you?" I smiled slightly and responded calmly, "Of course not. I'm so busy with work that I sometimes neglect my family. I'm grateful that you're willing to help take care of Kian." Hearing this, both Rosie and Steven breathed a sigh of relief. My son then ran up to me, his innocent eyes looking straight into mine as he asked, "Mom, are you going to the office today, or will you go to kindergarten with Dad and me?" I gently patted his head and asked, "What does Kian want Mommy to do?" Without hesitation, he replied, "I want Mommy to go to work, and Aunt Rosie can take Daddy and me to kindergarten." As though afraid Kian would say something inappropriate, Steven quickly pulled him into his arms and explained to me, "Sweetheart, Kian just doesn't want to distract you from work. Last time, he even told me not to bother you because you're working so hard." Rosie nodded in agreement. Kian is such a considerate child. Only someone as outstanding as you, Daphne, could have such an obedient son. Smiling, I said to my son, all right, let's do as Kian says. Hearing this, Kian jumped up and down with joy. He completely ignored my presence, grabbing Rosie and Steven's hands and dragging them outside. Watching their happy little family of 3, I allowed myself a faint smile, turned around, and went back to my study to continue my unfinished work. Perhaps they thought I was easy to fool, that I'd never notice anything strange, so Rosie grew bolder by the day. At first, she would sneak around with Steven while I was at work. But now, even when I was home, she'd find all sorts of excuses to visit. Daphne, I've been teaching myself how to cook recently. I wanted to make something delicious to thank you for all your help over the years. Daphne, I just came back from the countryside and brought some local specialties for you. Daphne, I've quit my job to start a business, but I'm short on startup funds. Can you help me out? Although I knew deep down that Rosie's visits were all excuses to see my son and Steven, I never refused her. Whenever she came, I always welcomed her politely. I even agreed to all her requests for help. Steven seemed delighted with this arrangement. Whenever Rosie came over, his lips would curl into an uncontrollable smile. Sometimes, he'd even flirt with her openly in front of me, exchanging knowing glances and secret smiles. Even my son grew more and more attached to Rosie, going so far as to buy her a pair of house slippers so she could visit anytime she wanted. This life continued until my son's college entrance exams. On the day the results were released, Rosie arrived at our house early in the morning to wait with us. When we saw my son's shockingly low score, Steven furrowed his brows in anger. How could you score this poorly? He snapped. My son, however, remained nonchalant. So what? Our family has money. Mom can just buy me a spot at any school she wants, Kian declared carelessly. Steven gave me a subtle glance. Seeing that I didn't react, he continued, your mom may love you, but she can't indulge you like this. Running the company alone isn't easy for her. You need to show some ambition. How else will you help her or make her feel confident enough to hand the company over to you one day? Rosie chimed in earnestly, Kian, your dad is right. Even though Daphne is your mom and will always take care of you, you need to develop your own capabilities. Otherwise, how will you earn the respect of the seasoned executives when you take over the company? Watching the two of them echo each other, I smiled faintly and said calmly, it's fine. I've already planned everything for Kian. I'll send him abroad for further studies. Once he's back, he'll naturally take over the company. After all, everything I have is for Kian. Hearing this, the 3 of them smiled contentedly. I smiled too, but for a different reason. They thought I was naive. I thought they were laughably foolish. During the process of arranging his study abroad, I took my son to the company every day, teaching him the ins and outs of the business without reservation. On the day of his departure, Steven accompanied him to the airport, gripping his hand tightly, his face filled with reluctance. Rosie also made a special trip, bringing a pile of things for my son, worried about his life in a foreign country. The 2 of them gave him endless reminders, creating a warm and touching scene, a true depiction of parents' worry when their child travels far away. After my son boarded the plane, they watched it ascend into the sky, their eyes brimming with tears until it disappeared from view. Only then did they leave, reluctantly, with tears still glistening. Once my son left for his studies, Rosie visited our house less frequently, but Steven began going out more often. Each time he returned, he seemed utterly drained. When I asked about it, he'd claim he was out with friends or had joined a gym to stay fit. On days he ran out of excuses, he'd feign sadness, sighing dramatically. I raised Kian with my own hands. He's never been away from me for this long. I can't help but miss him. If I don't find something to occupy myself, I'll fall apart. Ignoring the lingering scent of Rosie's signature perfume on him, I smiled and reassured him, Kian will be back soon. Then, we can all be together again. Steven's lips curved into a faint smile, laden with hidden meaning. Yes, soon, our family of 3 will be reunited. For years later, my son returned from studying abroad. Just like old times, Rosie showed up early at my house, accompanying Steven and me to the airport. The moment they saw my son, Rosie and Steven couldn't contain themselves, rushing forward to embrace him tightly as if no one else existed. After their emotional reunion, my son walked straight up to me and got straight to the point. Mom, I'm back. When will you hand over the company to me? Seeing his eagerness, I smiled calmly and said, let's go. I've already arranged a press conference. I'll officially hand everything over to you in front of everyone. At the press conference, the room was packed to capacity. Journalists, prominent figures, and business elites had all gathered to witness the historic moment of the Stellar Sync Group's leadership transition. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, I announced, my son, Kian, will take over as the new president of the Stellar Sync Group. Under the witness of lawyers and the cameras of the press, I signed the transfer agreement, officially handing over all my assets and company shares to my son. Thunderous applause erupted, and the crowd was abuzz with admiration. Many remarked on the deep bond between mother and son, their eyes filled with envy as they looked at my son. Just then, Rosie arrived fashionably late, arm in arm with Steven. The room fell silent, confusion and surprise etched onto everyone's faces as Rosie pulled out a paternity test report. With a loud voice, she declared, Daphne, the truth is, the IVF child you gave birth to all those years ago came from my and Steven's fertilized egg. I am Kian's biological mother. Letting him call you Mom for over 20 years was already repayment man enough for carrying him. Now, it's time for you to give him back to me. Her words caused an uproar. Isn't she the impoverished student Daphne always supported? How could she get involved with Daphne's husband and even have Daphne give birth to their child? This is outrageous. It's the classic farmer and the snake story. Daphne helped her so much, and she repays her with betrayal. And the timing? She waited until Daphne transferred the company's shares before making this claim. Clearly, it's about the money. Exactly. It's despicable to exploit someone to bear their child and then steal everything they own. This is pure evil. Amidst the intense condemnation, Stephen spoke up, self-righteous and indignant. For the first half of my life, I was trapped in a marriage. As a man, I kept convincing myself to stay responsible for this relationship. But I'm human too. On countless sleepless nights, I asked myself, is this truly the life I want? Daphne has a good family background and has treated both me and Kian well, but my heart belongs to Rosie. Is it wrong for me to pursue true love? Marriage is meant to bring happiness, and so is divorce. Marriage should not be a shackle that keeps me from my true love. I hope everyone can bless us. His words were delivered with such emotion, as if he were a victim of an unhappy marriage, bravely defying societal norms to seek love. I paid him no mind. Instead, I turned to my son and asked calmly, what do you think about all this? Kian looked carefully at the share transfer agreement in his hand before responding calmly, Mom, this will be the last time I call you that. Although you raised me with care for over 20 years, the fact remains that you are not my biological mother. Blood is thicker than water. I hope you won't stand in the way of our family's reunion. With that, he threw a divorce agreement at my face and said arrogantly, while everyone is here, divorce my dad today and set him free. In light of how well you've treated me over the years, I'll give you $200 a month as alimony. His words sparked outrage among the crowd. No wonder they say like mother, like son. What kind of family is this? Exactly. Everyone knows Daphne always treated her son like a treasure, pampering him for years. And now, the moment she transfers her fortune to him, he turns around and calls someone else mom.